The Orioles suffered a tough loss at Yankee Stadium on Monday night and have now dropped 5 out of 6. But look at the bright side. This team's still 15 games over 500, and they've got 4 All-Stars for the first time since 2016. I'll recap the game and break down who's going to Seattle and why coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, July 4th, 2023, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap kind of a gut punch of a loss for the Orioles as they fell 6-3 to the New York Yankees in the Bronx on Monday night. Going to get you the 5 things you need to know from that one, including another good Tyler Wells start, a big day from Adley Rutschman, and a tough day for the back end of the Orioles bullpen. Then we're talking All-Stars. The Orioles on Sunday, 4 players were named to the 2023 All-Star game. Tell you who they are and why they all deserve this trip to Seattle. And finally, a couple of injury updates on Jordan Westburg and Austin Hayes, who were hurt in Sunday's game. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Before we get there, though, just did want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcast listening platforms, and we're right here on YouTube. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Always doing giveaways here at the page for subscribers, so make sure you go ahead and subscribe. Thank you to the everydayers out there, and thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day every day. And we'll start today with an Orioles loss. Final score from the Bronx, Yankee Stadium, Yankees 6 and Orioles 3 in a game in which the Orioles led 3-0 early after a run in the second and 2 in the third against Domingo Germán, who was not throwing a perfect game for very long in this one and didn't come anywhere close to a perfect game in this one. But the O's were not able to hold the lead. 6 unanswered runs by the Yankees, capped off by a Harrison Bader 3-run go-ahead homer in the 8th. And the Yankees beat the Orioles 6-3 to take game 1 of a 4-game series. Orioles dropped to 49-34 with the loss. Yankees now 47-38, meaning the O's maintaining a 3-game lead on the Yankees in the wildcard standings for that number 1 wildcard spot in the American League. And I'm going to get you the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles 6-3 loss to the Yankees. And the first thing you need to know is it was a nice day for Adley Rutschman, who had 3 hits in this one, his 7th game of 3 or more hits on the season. Rutschman goes 3 for 5 with a double, a couple of singles, and an RBI in this one. Hit the ball hard, only once, but hey, he's getting on base. He's getting on base. And it's nice to see that from Adley because he did not have a great month of June. Now, he was still named to the All-Star team, as we will get to in just a minute, but June was the worst month, really by far, of his professional career. So to go out there and get 3 hits in this game after he had a couple of multi-hit games right at the end of the month, this is a good stretch for Adley Rutschman. Second thing you need to know, speaking of guys trying to break out of slumps, is Ryan O'Hearn got his mojo back in this game. O'Hearn a 2 for 4 with a couple of singles and an RBI. And really a turning point in this game. O'Hearn was the one who singled to start the second inning to break up the Domingo Germán perfect game. Also had an RBI single in the 3rd inning. But I think one of the biggest points of this game is O'Hearn came up with runners on 2nd and 3rd and 2 down in the top of the 7th. The Orioles leading this one 3-2. He had a chance against Ian Hamilton. First pitch hits a scorching line drive to short, and Anthony Volpe makes a really nice lunging play to take away a 2-run single. That ball gets through off the bat of O'Hearn. That's scoring 2 runs. That's changing the game completely, but he was hitting the ball hard again and was finally rewarded once again with a couple of hits. And that was the thing with the Orioles offense. I get that they only scored 3 runs and, they scored 3 runs in 3 games in the series loss over the weekend to the Twins, but the Orioles did have 12 hits in this game. And yes, they did not walk at all, but you got to feel a lot better when you couldn't hit at all for an entire series. That yes, maybe didn't cash in like you'd want to, but 12 hits is 12 hits, and that is a good sign moving forward for the O's. Third thing you need to know from this one is that Tyler Wells was Tyler Wells. I mean, there's no other way to put it. He was exactly what he's been all year. And maybe he was a little worse in certain areas, but generally another good start from Tyler Wells. He goes 6 innings in this game, allowing 2 runs on 5 hits with 4 strikeouts and 2 walks. Of course, the 2 runs came on 2 solo home runs, back-to-back shots hit by Anthony Volpe and Kyle Higashioka, the 8 and 9 hitters for the Yankees in the 5th inning that made it a 3-1 and then a 3-2 game. That makes it 21 home runs allowed on the year by Tyler Wells, which is tied for the most in all of Major League Baseball with the Blue Jays lefty Yusei Kikuchi. But again, as we've talked about really all year, 15 of the 21 homers have been solo shots, and the other 6 have been 2-run shots. He hasn't really been hurt by the home run this year. Now, the Yankees really were squaring Wells up in this game. He allowed 12 hard hit balls in 6 innings. That's a lot more than he usually allows. It was generally a concerning start for Wells. It was a great job to get out of that jam in the 6th and get himself through 6 innings. But he didn't have his best stuff. It was only 9 whiffs on the day on 44 swings. But still, he gives you a quality start, 6 innings, 2 runs, couple of homers. That's what it's been almost every time out there. For Tyler Wells this season, it's really nice to at least be able to rely on that if you are Brandon Hyde, sending him out there every 5 days. Fourth thing you need to know from the Orioles' 6-3 loss to the Yankees is that the bullpen struggled in this game, but it wasn't as much the kind of middle relief guys that have been struggling. I would say it was more so some of the back end guys. The Orioles went with Mike Baumann to open the 7th inning, leading 3-2, and Baumann allowed 2 singles and then a sacrifice bunt and left the game, a couple of really hard hit singles. Then Yennier Cano comes in, gets a ground ball back to the pitcher for the second out, still has the lead intact, goes 0-2 to the next hitter, and his first wild pitch of the season. First wild pitch of the season, throws it 0-2 to Gleyber Torres, ties the game, allows the runner to score from third. He did get Torres to line out later in the at-bat to keep it tied 3-3. It was just really tough to see that happen at that point, be his first wild pitch. Then he allows a leadoff single in the 8th. The Orioles go to Danny Coulombe, and Danny Coulombe just didn't have his stuff in this one. Coulombe comes in, he allows a single, and then the 3-run homer to Harrison Bader, which tied the game. Not great from Baumann, Cano, and Coulombe, who I would say are 2, 3, and 4 among most trustworthy Orioles relievers, obviously behind Félix Bautista. Just wasn't their night. The offense didn't come through with the big hits either. But the 5th and final thing you need to know from this one is that, hey, Chris Vallimont made his Major League debut in this game. We talked about it on Monday's episode, was called up over the weekend, and makes his debut in this one, replacing Coulombe with 1 out in the 8th. Now, he did retire both batters he faced and now has a 0 ERA in the bigs and kept it at a 6-3 game after the Bader home run. It was an interesting way to get the 2 outs. The first one was a double by Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, who then tried to go to third on a bad throw and was thrown out by Ryan O'Hearn, who was backing up the play nicely. But Vallimont did then strike out Volpe on a nasty changeup to get himself a 0 ERA. And shout out to Vallimont. Not sure how long he's going to be in this Orioles bullpen, but really cool to see him make his debut and put up a 0 out there. Yeah, he was the only Orioles reliever that had success and put up a 0 in this game. But you know what? I thought Brandon Hyde, he pushed the right buttons. He kept most of these guys available for the rest of the week. I mean, Baumann, 10 pitches, Cano, 14 pitches, Coulombe, 8 pitches, Vallimont, 11 pitches, which means they're all going to be available tomorrow. It was just tough that nobody was really super effective in this game, and it was one of the reasons the Orioles came out on the losing end. But it's not all doom and gloom on this episode. Yes, it's tough always to lose to the Yankees, especially in the Bronx. But hey, the Orioles have 4 All-Stars that were named on Sunday, and I didn't get a chance to talk about them on Monday's episode. So we're going to talk about them today when I come back. Adley Rutschman, Yennier Cano, Félix Bautista, Austin Hayes, all heading to Seattle for the All-Star game. And coming up next, we'll break down their season so far and talk about why it was 4 very deserving All-Stars for the Orioles. But first, This episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Take your first swing at betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets, up to $200. That's right, just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets. That is win or lose, you're getting the $200 in bonus bets. That's $200 you can spend betting everything from the money line to the over-under to who you think is going to hit the first home run. And it's all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. And plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today and visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. So the Orioles do fall to the Yankees 6-3 on Monday night in game one of a 4-game set. Have now lost 5 of 6. And listen, the Orioles are not playing the best baseball right now. The offense was struggling for a while. 12 hits Monday was good, but didn't quite come through with the big hits that they needed later in the game to extend their lead. And it hurt them. Bullpen couldn't hold it, and the Orioles fall to the Yankees. The people that are out there saying the season is over, this team's going to sell, this team's going to finish under 500, there's no way this team's making the playoffs. Maybe get a little feel for a baseball season that's 162 games. The Orioles haven't had any kind of slump all year. Remember the 4-game losing streak that they broke with the win on Sunday was their longest losing streak of the season. That's pretty good when you haven't lost 4 games in a row until July. I'll take that. And again, the All-Star break is coming up. Probably a good time for the Orioles to get a little rest. But there are 4 Orioles, at least, who won't be getting as much of a rest. But I'll still take it as a good thing because the Orioles, as we found out on Sunday evening after I had recorded Monday's episode, they will have 4 representatives in the 2023 MLB All-Star Game in Seattle a week from today, Tuesday, July 11th. And what an awesome honor it is for all 4 Orioles. Adley Rutschman, Austin Hayes, Félix Bautista, and Yennier Cano. And I got to say, I had been talking about the Orioles All-Stars like they probably had 2 locks. I felt like all along Félix and Adley were going to be locks. Just no question about it. I knew that Cano had a chance. I knew that Hayes had a chance. Really, Mullins had a chance before he got hurt. And there was a super outside chance probably for Tyler Wells as well. But I really did think there was a good chance the O's would just get the 2 All-Stars. It would be Félix and Adley, and that would still be a really good representation for the Orioles. But they got the 4. And it was awesome to see. And what was really cool is, while none of these 4 guys got voted in as starters, obviously only Adley and Hayes could have been, and you can make a strong argument that Adley Rutschman should have been the starting catcher, had a better WRC plus than Jonah Heim of the Rangers. However, it is very cool to know that all 4 of these players were voted in by the fellow players. So here's how kind of the All-Star voting works. The voting comes from the fans first. They vote in the starters. Then the players rank the top 2 at each position in each league, and those votes are tallied up, and those guys go to the game. Then Major League Baseball itself, along with the managers of each team, so Rob Thompson and Dusty Baker, come in and fill in the last couple of spots. So if between the fan vote and the player vote, a team didn't have a representative, because every team has to have a representative, that's when MLB and the 2 managers step in and they name the last few players. It was very cool to see that the players themselves, their peers, voted in Adley, Félix, Yennier, and Austin. That is cool to see. That is respect from your fellow players. Now let's start with Adley Rutschman. He was probably the biggest lock for this. I mean, had a good chance to be a starter, didn't win the secondary fan vote, whatever that was. But Adley coming into play on Monday, this is before he had the 3-hit game Monday night, 268 average, 374 on base, 415 slugging with 11 homers, a 121 WRC plus, and a 1.8 WAR according to FanGraphs. Just a great year behind the plate. Yeah, he had a really, I wouldn't say terrible month of June, but a pretty rough month of June, and still has really, really good stats. I think if anything on Monday shows you he's going to pick it up in July, and it's going to be fun to watch. And then we got even cooler news for Adley on Monday. He is going to be participating in the home run derby. Adley, of course, his first ever home run derby. His dad is going to be pitching to him, which is a super cool moment as well. Now, the question is, what will Adley do in the derby? Because he is a switch hitter. I don't know if there's rules about switch hitters. There's not many switch hitters who have competed in the derby recently. I don't know if you have to pick a side, at least for every round. But I will say that it's not a huge difference between kind of the power alleys in left field and right field at T-Mobile Park in Seattle. However, talking to some Mariners people, they say, yeah, it's a little easier to hit a home run down the right field line than it is the left field line. And in the gaps, it is easier to hit a homer to the right center field gap than it is the left center field gap. So I would assume from that, Adley Rutschman would bat left-handed. But being a switch hitter who has power from both sides of the plate, I feel it gives you an advantage in the home run derby if you can switch sides. Because if you get into the second round or it gets later or you're getting tired in the middle of a round and you call your timeout, you can switch sides and you're still going to be tired from swinging, but it saves you a little bit, just a little bit, if you can switch to the other side of the plate and start swinging from there. It's, you're using muscles in kind of a different way, so maybe they don't get as tired out. Maybe that's an advantage for Adley in the home run derby. Now, the next All-Star who I felt like also was pretty much a lock was Félix Bautista. I mean, he has been the best reliever in the American League this year, full stop. Just won AL Reliever of the Month award for June. He won it in April and in June, and probably could have won it in May as well. He was just amazing in June, didn't walk anybody, had more than 2 strikeouts per 9. But Félix on the season, 38 2/3 innings, a 1.16 ERA, a 51% strikeout rate, which is the second highest ever so far in a season in Major League Baseball, an 11% walk rate. Again, he's striking out more than half the batters he's facing. It's ridiculous. 22 saves, a 1.8 F4. He's just been amazing. And here's the thing about Félix. Not only is he in the All-Star game, which is amazing, so deserved. I mean, 10 years it took him from getting signed by the Marlins as an international free agent out of the Dominican Republic to pitching in the big leagues for the Orioles. 10 years, that is a long time. However, it is really cool, and it's even cooler than the fact that he's been the best closer in the game this year. And if Dusty Baker is doing things right, if the American League is looking to lock things down in the 9th inning of the All-Star game, Félix should be the guy who gets the ball in the 9th. And that is honestly even cooler. Then it takes us to the guys who I didn't feel like were locks. And I'll say first, that was Yennier Cano. I felt like if you would have told me the O's had 3 All-Stars, I would have guessed Rutschman, Bautista, and Cano. I thought he had the third best case. Now, it is a little tougher to get into the All-Star game as a reliever when you aren't a closer. Generally, it's closers who get into the game. But Cano has been so good, and he was the best reliever in baseball for the first 6 weeks he was in the big leagues. Remember, he didn't give up a run for so long, didn't walk a guy for forever. That I think guys just remember that, and they put him in the game. And I wouldn't say he struggled lately, because he hasn't. He just hasn't been unhittable recently. But Cano, before Monday's outing, 40 1/3 innings, a 1.12 ERA, which is actually lower than Bautista's, 25% strikeout rate, 4% walk rate, a ridiculous 66% ground ball rate. 2/3 of the hitters he's facing, just getting him to beat the ball into the ground, 1.5 F4. That's according to FanGraphs. He's just been amazing. What a story it's been. Couldn't throw a strike last year, had an ERA over 11, and the Orioles just fixed the arm slot and fixed Cano, and he's become one of the best setup men in baseball. Now, this might be a little more of a stretch because generally the middle relief guys, or at least the non-closers that make this game, they'll pitch earlier. And then you have a few closers on the team who will pitch like the 7th, 8th, and 9th of the All-Star game. But even if Cano only gets to face a batter or two, wouldn't it be incredible if the AL closed out the All-Star game with Cano in the 8th and Bautista in the 9th? It's a little bit of a stretch to ask for, but that would be absolutely amazing. And even better if they could have Adley Rutschman catching both of those guys late in the game, and maybe you get an Adley and Félix hug to end the All-Star game. That's like number 1 on the wish list for the 2023 All-Star game. But the biggest surprise, I think, from the O's, and he was deserving, but I was a little worried about him, was Austin Hayes. And now hopefully Hayes is going to be healthy for the All-Star game. We'll get to that in a minute. But Austin Hayes, man, I mean, what an awesome moment it is for him to get into the All-Star game. 312 average, 352 on base, 491 slugging. The average and the slugging both lead the Orioles. 8 homers, his 133 WRC plus is best on the team. 1.9 F4 is best on the team for Austin Hayes. Been really good defensively, showing off the arm, hitting for a high average, hitting for some power, getting on base. He's been amazing this year. And for all Hayes has been through, since, he got called up really shortly after being drafted, all the way back in September of 2017, to then spending the next year and a half in the minors before coming back in 2019, and then, having the injury issues, but doing some good things in 2020, and then more injury issues in 21, the great first half in 22, plays through the injury in the second half, was abysmal last season. To come in here, get healthy, and have an amazing first half and be named an all-star by his peers is just so cool for Austin Hayes. Now, again, he's got the injury right now. It doesn't seem super serious with the hip issue. Hopefully he'll be good to play in the game. But I felt like, when the Orioles posted that video of Brandon Hyde telling the team in the locker room on Sunday that they had made the All-Star game, the Hayes one was the coolest, I feel like, because he's grinded in the bigs for so long, dealt with so many injuries, the ups and downs. Just going to be so cool to see him in the All-Star game. But either way, 4 representatives for the Orioles is awesome with Rutschman, Bautista, Hayes, and Cano. But I think the big question now that they've got the 4 All-Stars, one is there any chance maybe Tyler Wells could be a replacement? I think there's too many pitchers ahead of him for that to be the case, but he has had a great first half. The other question is, will Austin Hayes be healthy enough to play in the game? I think that's the other thing to talk about. Well, we do have a Hayes update and a Westburg update, and we'll get to that to finish off the pod coming up next. So that Orioles loss on Monday night was tough, falling 6-3 to the Yankees on the Harrison Bader 3-run homer in the 8th inning. But good thing about baseball, you're right back out there the next day, especially when you got a 4-game series in the Bronx. You can go right back to it and try to even up the series at 1 game apiece on Tuesday. And that's what the O's will do on a little 4th of July day game at Yankee Stadium, a 1:05 p.m. Eastern time first pitch. Kyle Gibson goes for the Orioles. For Kyle Gibson, it hasn't been the best over his last 2 starts, but his first start this year in Yankee Stadium was maybe his best of the season, so hopefully he can channel that against the Yankees today. He'll go up against the right-hander Clark Schmidt, who hasn't really been very good this season either, and honestly has been worse than Kyle Gibson, the 27-year-old right-hander. The O's have gotten to him a little bit this year. A lot of teams have been able to get to Clark Schmidt at different times, so hopefully the O's bats started to wake up Monday with the 12 hits. Hopefully they can continue to wake up in this one. Schmidt in his start against the Orioles at Camden Yards on April 7th. Last year, just 3 1/3 innings, 4 runs on 5 hits with 3 Ks and 3 walks. He also did face the Orioles at Yankee Stadium May 25th. Was much better that time. 5 innings, 1 run, 5 hits, 4 Ks, and 2 walks. We'll see what the O's can do to him here on Tuesday afternoon. And you can listen to every pitch of the Orioles' hometown radio broadcast of the second game of the series between the O's and the Yankees with the SXM app from SiriusXM. Just download the app and search Orioles. But the other question to be answered is, will the O's have the services of Jordan Westburg and Austin Hayes here in Tuesday's day game? Now, I would guess no, just because of the short turnaround, and neither were available on Monday night. If you noticed, Westburg and Hayes both out of the lineup on Monday after both suffering some bumps and bruises on Sunday. Austin Hayes left the game in the 3rd inning Sunday after a 2nd inning collision at first base with Donovan Solano, left with a right hip issue. But, didn't have any breaks, didn't have anything bad. The Orioles have called him day-to-day. And then there's Jordan Westburg, who was hit on the wrist by a 101.3 mile per hour fastball from Juan Duran in the 8th inning on Sunday. Of course, it was an RBI hit by pitch that gave the Orioles the lead in the game, but still it did hurt, and he did not play on Monday. Now, obviously, we don't know how each player is feeling, but just from how the injuries looked, I was honestly more concerned with Jordan Westburg, just because Hayes, it was more of an awkward collision, and you never want to run into anybody at first base, but he did go out there defensively for that next whole inning and then came out of the game, so that's a good sign. And to be fair for Westburg, he got hit in the 8th. He stayed in to run, and then he played second base in the top of the 9th inning on Sunday. Now, wasn't anything hit to him. He didn't really have to run the bases in the 8th inning because Mateo struck out the next batter. But you take 101 off the wrist, you're worried about a guy's hands, his wrist. Those break a lot in that exact scenario. But Westburg had the x-rays on Monday. They were clean. According to Brandon Hyde, there was no breaks, no fractures, nothing. Now, he's bruised up. And Hyde did say that Hayes and Westburg were both sore and were both going to be unavailable on Monday. Now, again, because of the quick turnaround, the 105 game, I don't expect them to be in there Tuesday. But the hope would be that maybe both of them can be back in the lineup on Wednesday night. Just missing 2 games, that's a W for the Orioles right there. Now, they were both sore, but both of them were stretching with the Orioles, according to Nathan Ruiz of the Baltimore Sun on Monday before the game. Hyde also said that Jordan Westburg did take BP before Monday's game. That's a really, really good sign. To me, it feels like Westburg, if one does come back earlier, it could be Westburg just because he took batting practice. But at this point, the fact that neither of them went on the injured list Monday tells me that neither of them are probably going to go on the IL unless either has a setback. So yeah, it's tough to have them, be unavailable for a couple days, but not be on the injured list, so you can't make a roster move. And the O's were kind of, tied up a little bit Monday night because when you can't start Westburg or Hayes and you don't have them available, you basically have a two-man bench at that point. They had Anthony Benboom and Ryan McKenna was their two-man bench. They had to start Jorge Mateo, and not only that, Mateo had to hit late in the game, specifically in the ninth inning, because you couldn't pinch hit for him. I mean, you had a righty on the hill. Were you really going to put in Ryan McKenna or Anthony Benboom to pinch hit at that point? I mean, you probably wouldn't. Actually, McKenna was already in the game as defensive replacement. So they were basically down to Anthony Benboom in the ninth inning. You're not going to pinch hit Benboom for Mateo. I know Mateo's been bad, but he's still a better hitter than Anthony Benboom, I would at least think at this point. And so, yeah, it really hurts your roster a little bit, but you can't just put them on the IL because then you lose them for 10 days. And if they're only going to be out for 2 or 3, you just kind of got to eat it, hope Mateo and Frazier and those guys can hit a little bit at the bottom while Hayes and Westburg are out, but hopefully it's going to be a quick time. And it's good that the x-rays were clean, further testing was clean, and that they are, at least for now, avoiding the injured list. And hopefully that means Austin Hayes can get back in some games and will be healthy to play in that All-Star game next week in Seattle. But the O's, as I mentioned, right back at it, day game today, hopefully get back to the winning ways in the Bronx. And I'll be back with you tomorrow, Wednesday episode. I'll be recapping Game 2 between the Orioles and the Yankees. And coming up this week, going to have some draft content coming up because even before we get to the All-Star game, the MLB draft is coming up on Sunday. The Orioles picking a little later this year, down from number 1 to number 17 in the draft. So how does that change the strategy? Who are the players they could select and who will they select in Sunday's first round? Well, Joe Doyle is coming back on the pod. One of my most trusted sources looking at his stuff in terms of covering the MLB draft. He's going to be back with us this week to talk all things Orioles and the MLB draft with the number 17 selection. But that is all coming up on tomorrow's episode. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.